In this installment of programming, we're going to talk about using classes. Now, classes are a fantastic way to encapsulate your code, make things reusable, but also to give you the ability to create multiple instances of something on screen. So right now we hard-coded in this creature, but if I wanted to have two creatures or three creatures that were similar so that they have properties, their height, their width, their different features, but each one moves differently and independently, so we can create different instances or versions of our creature object, that is where classes come into play. So because of how we structured our code in the previous lesson, it becomes a fairly straightforward process to do. So what I need to do is I need to create my class file. The class file is going to hold the constructor, methods, and properties of my class. So to do that, I'm going to click on the little arrow next to my tab here, and I will say New Tab. And when I do that, I'm going to name my class. Now when I name classes by convention, there's no hard and fast rule, but by convention, they begin their name with a capital letter. And this holds true across most modern programming languages. So now we can see it created a new tab. I can navigate between my tabs. Now one advantage of doing this is it makes my files a little bit easier to navigate, so I don't have to scroll, because we could add our classes into this one single document and it would be one long document, and that's okay, but it is a little bit messier to deal with. Now the way that we write a class is we start out and specify our class name as part of it. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. We say the word class. Duh. The same way that we type everything else. Now my class name. So the word class, my class name, and notice the tab or file name matches the name I've now listed here. They're both capital C. Then I do a curly brace. I'm going to hit a bunch of returns and a closing curly brace. Now a class, it consists of three items. It has the properties of the class. It has the constructor, and it has methods. So properties are the things that are inherent to it. So if a person was a class, they would have an age, they would have a name, they would have a height, they would have a width, they would have an eye color. These are all properties that would be making each instance of it a little bit unique and different, because we could set them, but all instances of that class, of that person, have the same possible properties. Now, the constructor is a special function that is part of our class where we kind of instantiate or create the class when we call it. And we'll see how that works. And then our methods are the things that it knows how to do. The good part is we've constructed most of these, except for the constructor, in our prior document. Now, the constructor takes the name of the class. It has two parentheses and then curly brace, return twice, close curly brace. So that now gives me the constructor for this. And now we can populate these three parts of our class. So when I go back over here, I will see that we have some properties. So I'm going to take these properties that I have here, I'm going to copy them, and I'm not going to delete anything yet out of here. I'm just going to comment it out once I've copied it, and then we'll go back and clean up our code and delete it, and we'll see how tidy our main file becomes as we move a lot of this content into our class. Now those properties go here. Now I'm going to auto format, Command or Control T, to clean up my indents. It's very important while you're working that you're always making sure that your curly braces have a partner. So I click by this curly brace, it shows me its mate. This curly brace mates with that one. And that we take control of our indents. If we do that, it will make our life a little bit easier in the long term. Now, the items that go into our constructor, well, we have the properties and where we gave them values. So I'm going to copy that, comment that out. Now we can go over here and that will go into our constructor. So the constructor, now auto format, the constructor is very much like our setup function. It's the setup function for the class where it takes care of assigning all of the values to it. Now, if I go down here, we have methods, things, the creature, it updated itself and displayed itself. So I'm going to select all of those functions. Now I'm not grabbing clear background because clear background is for the program. It's not for an individual item to worry about. All right, so we'll copy that, comment those out. Now I'm going to go back into my class here and paste in those methods, auto format to clean up my indents. And now we can see, okay, now we have our class, which is kind of the bulk of what was in our previous item here. And we'll say, oh no, we're getting some red saying, oh, it's unhappy. I click here, it says, hey, it doesn't exist. Well, it doesn't exist in our main program, but it does exist inside the class object. So to use a class now, what we do is we say the class name, the same way that we said float, because we made a variable for a number. Now I'm going to use my class name because I'm going to make a variable reference to using my class. And I'll just call it C. Now I need to create a new instance of it, so I will say C is equal to new creature, 2 parentheses, semicolon. So what we're doing is we're creating a new instance of the class and we're calling the function. So the same way we called clear background, where we just said clear background, now we're calling the creature constructor. So we're constructing a version of creature. Now, my main program doesn't know how to update creature, but my new object C does. So I say C dot update creature, C dot display creature. And if I hit run, I'll see that it looks the same. So I'm going to reiterate. I copied my properties and I'm using those same properties inside my creature. Inside of setup, where I gave initial values to everything, I put that into my constructor. So when I call that constructor, it's setting those values. And finally, I'm able to update and display those. So now I'm going to get rid of all that stuff that I commented out. Now that things are working. And I'm getting rid of it to clean up the code to make it a little bit easier to see. But what I want to do is I want to make it so that when I create a new creature, I pass into it a location for it to be. So it doesn't necessarily start at the middle. Because if I made a second or a third or fourth version of the creature, well, they would all start at the same place and they would all move at the same speed. So we're going to modify the creature's constructor so that we can tell it where we want it to start and we'll allow it to have random speeds. So the way that we do that is we can pass in some numbers. So I'm going to just pass in a number here, and in this case I will say, instead of starting at 400, I'll start it at 300. And then I want to start it at 250. Now we're getting red underline because it says creature intent doesn't exist. But we can make it exist. Because I can say float, because we're using floats, not ints. And it assumed I wanted ints because I said 300. If I said 300.0, 250.0, now And then get rid of the word float here, just so it's there. So now if I click here, it says creature float. Float does not exist. So remembering a float has a decimal point. But that is also a float. We just aren't showing the decimal point there. So now, once again, I'll say float, start x, float, start y. And instead of passing in 400, I will say start x. And instead of assigning it to 300, I'll say start y. So now if I run this, we'll see it started in a different location. Now if I change this to 200, 200, and run it, see it starts all the way in the top corner. So the power here is, what if I had a second creature? And then I say C2 is equal to new creature. And then this time I'm going to say it's going to start at 600 and 400. But I also need to tell C2 to update creature and C2.update or display creature. Now when we run it, we'll see that we have two creatures. So we're able to pass in values. Now, processing has another cool feature in that it can generate random numbers easily, and those numbers within a range. So I can simply say random, and I want a random number between -5 and 5. And we'll do that for the speed y as well. That means I'm going to get a random number anywhere between -5 and 5. It could be 0, could be 0.1, it could be 3, it could be 4, it could be -3, -2.78. We have a lot of options there. And if we run it, we'll see that the 1 is moving, it has a very small y speed and a much bigger x speed. And then the other one is much closer to our standard 5 in both directions. Not quite. It looks like it has, so the front one has a greater y speed than it does an x speed, but it's much closer to being even. The takeaway here. The takeaway is that now that I can create multiple instances of this, I can make as many copies of this on screen as I want. I could have 10, 100, or 1,000, and that is what we will be looking at in our next unit, is how to use arrays to have multiple versions and manage that, because we don't want to have to write C2, C3, C4, C5, C6. There has to be a better way, and using a collection of objects that we store in an array is one way that we can do that. And that is what we will look at going forward. But for right now, we get to enjoy our success at creating a class so that we can then have multiple copies or instances of that class object on screen. Looking inside my project folder, I will see that it now created a new file. Now it tells me that file is 0 bytes because, well, I haven't saved what I've done yet. So I'll save, and we'll now see that it has some data. Turns out our main file got smaller because we moved a lot of its content into this second file. So now our project has 2 files within it. It's even more important that we then keep track of our project through its folder. So we zip that folder when we're moving it around because it contains more than one item inside it. So good luck and have fun and enjoy working with classes.